The history of the Maya has long been cloaked in mystery, yet there was little interest in these enigmatic people before the turn of the century. Considered to be a lost civilization, their secrets remain buried in long-abandoned cities deep in the tropical forests. Only now, as we approach the end of the century, have new discoveries begun to shed light on an ancient civilization that once rose to such great heights. Recent advances in deciphering their complex system of hieroglyphic writing has led to a new appreciation of the world view of these spiritual people. From art to architecture, astronomy to mathematics, the accomplishments of this brilliant civilization were myriad. The Maya kept a written record of their history and culture on both paper and stone. While only a handful of the thousands of books in their libraries survived the Spanish conquest, the record on stone remains. They were a religious people, deeply influenced in their daily lives by the effects of celestial events and their belief in the cyclical nature of time. They were a practical people whose trade networks extended far beyond the borders of their powerful mini-kingdoms. They were a fierce people who followed their kings into battle and celebrated their victories by gambling on ritualistic ball games, where the losers often paid with their lives. What inspired the ancient Maya to create their towering pyramids and temples, broad plazas and palaces, at a time when Europe languished in the Dark Ages? And what does this rich legacy mean to the Maya today? In the 19th century, the first explorers to discover these amazing cities imagined them peopled by the lost descendants of the Egyptians or Greeks. Early archaeologists worked hard to dispel this myth. Only a few decades ago, the ancient Maya were routinely described as a peaceful people, ruled by astronomer priests. Recent advances in deciphering their language have shattered this myth. While only a few decades ago their written language remained largely undeciphered, today more than 60% of the glyphs can be read. Conferences like this one at the University of Texas at Austin bring together experts who are continuing work on deciphering this once mysterious language. Today, the history and knowledge of the Maya is being recovered. This is an exciting time of cultural rediscovery for both scholars and the modern Maya alike. However, this work is shadowed by the knowledge that time is working against them. Archaeologists are frequent losers in the race to find these hidden cities before they're damaged by looters. And acid rain is eating away at the elegant facades of their palaces and erasing many glyphs before they can be deciphered. The world of the Maya extended over much of present-day Central America, encompassing a wide variety of geographic regions. From the Pacific coast with its humid coastal plain in the south, up into the cool pine-covered highlands, studded with scores of active volcanoes. Their world encompassed the central rainforests that extend into Honduras El Salvador, and Belize. And far to the north, where the white sandy beaches of the Caribbean ring the low-lying Yucatan Peninsula. The early roots of Mayan culture can be traced back 3,000 years to the Olmecs, one of the first great civilizations to develop in the Americas. Near the coast of present-day Veracruz, the Olmecs built cities with large ceremonial centers, dominated by 10-story-high earthen pyramids. The Olmecs carved massive symbolic sculptures from volcanic rocks, some weighing as much as 100 tons, which they quarried from mountains 75 miles away. They are credited with developing the first calendar and written script, and their influence could still be found in many Mesoamerican cultures hundreds of years after the collapse of their society in the 6th century BC. The Maya drew upon this rich heritage in the development of their own cultural traditions. As the Olmec civilization in the north was in decline, the first great Mayan city-states were emerging in the south, in the rainforests of the Petén. The formative period of early Mayan history, known as the Preclassic, was traditionally characterized as a time of smaller-scale tribal society, with only limited political systems and public buildings. Today, archaeologists know this earlier assessment was erroneous. Recent excavations at the pre-classic cities of Nakbe and El Mirador have pushed back the accepted dates for the emergence of sophisticated Mayan civilization to at least 400 BC, around the time of the Golden Age of the Greeks. At its apex, the city center covered 16 square miles and was home to at least 20,000 residents. Broad roads connected the city to outlying towns, extending their control and trading networks to distant regions. The citizens of El Mirador relied on large reservoirs that filled during the rainy season. The entire city was paved with stucco and was designed to act as a giant catch and drainage system. In its ceremonial center, the largest pyramid complex ever built by the Maya, the Tigre Pyramid towered 18 stories high above the city. Without the aid of metal tools, domesticated animals, or the wheel, it took the work of thousands of laborers and artisans to transform the flat landscape of the forest into a sacred range of mountain pyramids. The Dante Pyramid, built on a hill overlooking the city, can be seen from 60 miles away. The construction and accompanying administration of El Mirador is evidence of a stratified and complex society which prospered under a long and successful line of kings. Why its people would subsequently abandon this great city at the end of the 2nd century remains a subject of intense speculation to this day. As the pre-classic period came to a close, the Mayan people were poised to enter a remarkable golden age of cultural stability and prosperity. Over 60 independent city-states, ranging in size from 50,000 to 500,000 inhabitants, would emerge to compete for preeminence. During the height of the classic period, Palenque became one of the most powerful and impressive of these kingdoms. Situated on the western frontier, the city's regional style reflects its frequent contact with diverse cultures to the north, in present-day Mexico. The architects of Palenque graced a naturally beautiful setting with an elegant style of building. Famous for its extensive architectural ornamentation, skillful artisans created finely detailed stucco art and carved lintels to decorate their temples. At Palenque, some of the most extensive hieroglyphic texts were inscribed, providing researchers today with many of the clues they needed to break the Maya code. The palace was an elaborate maze of courts, council rooms, narrow passageways, and subterranean chambers that served both as residence and administrative center. The Mayas' use of the vaulted corbelled arch rather than the rounded Roman arch limited the width of their rooms. Engineers at Palenque constructed a system of vaulted aqueducts to channel the spring waters of the area to the houses and steam baths of the nobility. The king's architects erected a 4-story watchtower that provided a view of the land stretching north to the sea by day, and an observatory to study the sky by night. One of the most illustrious kings to rule Palenque ascended the throne at the age of 12, and over the next 70 years was responsible for commissioning many of the city's greatest monuments. His name is recorded on the hieroglyphic inscriptions as Pakal, or shield. In 1949, archaeologists discovered a secret stairway, concealed for over 1,000 years in the Temple of Inscriptions, leading down several stories to a vaulted crypt at its core. He was entombed in a massive 25-ton sarcophagus, whose enormous size forced the architects to build the pyramid around it, a feat of structural engineering unparalleled in the Americas. At the entrance of the tomb, 5 sacrificial victims were discovered. Pakal was buried adorned with a king's treasure in jade. Covering his face was an exquisite portrait mask of jade and obsidian. On the sides of his sarcophagus, Pakal portrays his royal ancestors, including his mother, Lady Zack Cook, and great-grandmother, Lady Kanal Ikau, both of whom had ruled in their time as kings, a relative rarity in the Mayan world. Covering his sarcophagus was a 5-ton limestone slab intricately carved with Pakal at the moment of his death, the jaws of a monster pulling him down into the underworld. On his journey to resurrection, he descends along the path of the Waka Chan, or Maya sacred world tree. Like the sun, Pakal will rise again. Pakal's first son, Chan Balum, who ascended the throne at age 48, commemorated his dynastic succession by building 3 temples. Inside the Temple of the Cross, he faces his father in the underworld, receiving the symbols of power. The kings of Palenque ruled here in an unbroken line of succession for over 400 years. The Usumacinta River snakes its way from the highlands of Guatemala to the Gulf of Mexico. It was and remains a vital trade route through the heart of the Mayan world. Early traders plied these dangerous waters in cargo canoes, often laden with the precious commodities of the Maya: cacao, jade and obsidian, jaguar skins, shells, and incense. An important ally of Palenque, the magnificent city of Yaxchilan, rests on a series of enormous terraces high above a bend in the river. The city was founded in the 4th century A.D. by a king known as Progenitor Jaguar, who established a dynasty that would endure 500 years. During its height, at the beginning of the 8th century, his ancestors, Shield Jaguar and his son, Bird Jaguar, would greatly expand the borders of Yaxchilan through conquest and alliances. In the Byzantine world of Mayan superstate politics, there was constant maneuvering between the noble lineages for power. While the Maya never elected to unite under a federal form of government, they nevertheless lived under the same political structures, spoke the same language, and shared a common cultural vision of the world. Long idealized as a peaceful people, recent discoveries paint a different picture of a society where warfare was an important element of statecraft. On the front of a temple at Yaschalan, one of Bird Jaguar's many victories is symbolically recreated as a ball game. An important captive, bound inside a bouncing ball, is depicted on his way to the underworld. Unlike European warfare, for the Maya, the objective of battle was to capture and execute the opposing ruler. Military defeats were considered the result of the king's spiritual failure to properly maintain his covenant with the gods. For the Maya, there was no separation between the religious and political activities of the kingdom. The practices of bloodletting and sacrificing, by both the nobility and commoners alike, was seen as essential to the sustenance of the gods. They believed that humans had multiple souls, but the most powerful and indestructible kind of soul was called Chulel, a sacred force which permeates the entire universe, from humans to animals to sacred places.
When a Maya sacrificed either life or when he gave blood, they were giving the most precious commodities and precious substances on earth, and the blood is carrying souls, so they're literally giving part of their soul. The two most sacred places are the places where speech is made from the tongue and the place where males reproduce from the penis.
Bloodletting, fasting, and the effects of psychoactive plants were all methods of opening the portals to the underworld and communicating with the gods. Lady Greatskull, wife of Shield Jaguar, holds a lancet used for drawing blood. Once in trance, a royal ancestor appears out of the mouth of the visioned serpent. The rich architecture, art, and inscriptions of Yaschalan are today in danger of being destroyed by the floodwaters from a series of hydroelectric dams slated for construction on the mighty Usumacinta River. On the eastern border of the Mayan world, the city of Quirigua controlled the trade in two highly prized commodities, jade and obsidian. The city is famous for its collection of monumental monoliths. While early scholars believed these intricately carved portraits and their largely undeciphered texts dealt with astrological information, recent advances in reading these glyphs have revealed a different function. Known as stela, these great carved monuments are a record of the history of the cities and their rulers. They list the conquests and alliances, record the births and deaths, and celebrate the achievements of the nobility. Commissioned by kings, these texts were often a combination of political propaganda and proclamations of their divine right to rule, often by reference to creation stories. On one of the stela at Quirigua, researchers have deciphered a date equivalent to 3114 BC, declared to be the beginning of the fourth and current cycle of creation. They believed in a complex pantheon of gods inhabiting a multi-tiered universe. Beneath the middle world where humans dwelt, the underworld of Xibalba was the home of the gods and ancestors, like the mythological hero twins, playing a symbolic ball game against the lords of death.
Their ball court was for the reenactment of the ball game according to the Popol Vuh, when the hero twins play the ball and they annoy the lords of the underworld, who entice them to go under. They are captured and beheaded. And the Popol Vuh tells us that the two new hero twins eventually outwitted the lords of the underworld and destroyed them. No, they also used these Maalbal courts for the peaceful settling of political disputes. Depending on which period of the Mayan development, some losers were sacrificed. Others were held captives, and we can see all over the Mayan world where you have these captives carved in stone being humiliated in public. Then you have the winning king with all his royal regalia standing on top of the loser.
As the sun sets and the earth turns, Xibalba becomes the night sky, populated by gods whose actions were thought to directly impact the lives of humans and could be seen by all in the movements of the celestial bodies. In their intricate creation mythology, the Maya imparted symbolic meaning to astronomical patterns and events, creating a descriptive map of the sky throughout the year and revealing their complex understanding of the universe. Sacred tree of the Maya, the towering ceiba tree represents the Waka Chan, or world tree. Symbolically portrayed in the shape of a cross, the Waka Chan is believed to be the central axis of the world, enabling the Maya to center themselves in their universe. Deep in the rainforest of the Petén rise the sacred pyramid temples of Tikal, one of the most powerful city-states to develop in the central lowlands during the Classic Age. Only a few of the more than 3,000 buildings have been uncovered. The dense jungle landscape surrounding Tikal today gives little indication of how the region appeared 1,000 years ago. At the height of its population, there were close to 200,000 inhabitants living in the city and its outlying areas, with another 300,000 people coming under its extended control. Connected to the city center by a series of causeways, the surrounding areas were extensively cleared, terraced, and irrigated by a sophisticated system of canals and large reservoirs. The architectural layout of a Maya city was designed to reproduce the creation of the world. Their pyramids represented mountains, plazas were the sea, and ball courts were clefts in the earth that allowed people to access the underworld. Surrounding these powerful sacred spaces were the palaces of the kings. Tikal's rise to prominence coincided with that of Teotihuacan, hundreds of miles to the north in the Central Valley of Mexico. One of the first great metropolises to develop in all the Americas, Teotihuacan would spread its cultural influence over a wide area in Mesoamerica. Their trading network extended as far south as Tikal, whose merchants in turn established a trading post near Teotihuacan. Along with commodities, there was a steady cultural exchange. One of the most significant effects was the adoption by the kings of Tikal of new forms of weaponry and warfare, including the belief in Tlaloc, the Mexican god of war. This new method of warfare has been coined Star Wars by Maya scholars today, due to its emphasis on propitious astronomical conditions. Applying this new form of warfare, two of Tikal's most militaristic kings would lead their warriors to victory over the powerful neighboring kingdom of Huashactung. This new surge in wars of conquest increased the wealth and power of Tikal, recorded on a host of great monuments commissioned to celebrate these victories. During the 6th century, the growth in Tikal's fortunes would be abruptly halted by the emergence of a powerful adversary to the east, in the Maya mountains of present-day Belize. Lord Water, king of Caracol, in alliance with the neighboring kingdom of Calakmul, conquered Tikal. For the next century, Tikal would languish under the control of Caracol, and no monuments would be erected to record their history. Tikal would eventually regain its independence from Caracol, re-emerging as a major cultural and political power in the last centuries of the Classic period. Remarkably, during an age of extraordinary achievements, the Maya were unwittingly sowing the seeds that would lead to their eventual collapse. Beginning with the last date at Palenque in 799 AD, to the last recorded date at Tonina in 909 AD, the great cities of the central lowlands were slowly being abandoned. As the regional superpowers weakened, many of the smaller kingdoms were able to break away and enjoy a brief period of independence. Tonina, once subordinate to nearby Palenque, would capture and execute the last of Pecal's royal lineage during this time of increasing political chaos, though their triumph would be short-lived. Long considered mysterious, factors contributing to the collapse of the classic age of Maya civilization are now emerging. The glyphs tell of troubled foreign relations and endemic internal warfare between the Maya kingdoms for conquest and tribute, spurred on by an increasingly powerful and privileged noble class. Heavy population density created serious environmental problems and strained their agricultural systems, culminating in widespread malnutrition and disease. Ultimately, the Maya believed the root of all these problems lay in the failure of the king to maintain his covenant with the gods. They had lost faith in their government, abandoning their great cities like refugees in search of new lands and a simpler way of life. It is still a widely held misconception that the Maya somehow vanished following the collapse of the central lowland city-states. While they returned to village life in this area, a multitude of city-states continued to prosper in the Yucatan Peninsula. These northern cities would weave together the cultural traditions of the Maya with those of the diverse Mesoamerican cultures from the Gulf Coast region and the highlands of Mexico, with whom these more international Maya were in frequent contact. A fusion of Mexican and Mayan cosmology characterizes the art and architecture of the region. In the Puc Hills of the western Yucatan, the city of Uxmal exemplifies this elegant architectural style, with its spacious courtyards and intricately carved mosaic facades. Uxmal was an important center in the 11th century with a considerable sphere of influence, yet it would gradually decline as a more powerful empire emerged in the northern plains. A seafaring people known as the Itza, refugees from the fallen Toltec city-state of Mexico, established a series of trading centers along the Gulf Coast of Mexico. They soon moved inland, waging a series of fierce battles to win control of the Yucatan. Although militaristic, the Itza preferred to assimilate rather than eliminate the Mayan nobility of the cities they conquered. The capital of this new empire, Chichen Itza, replicated the design of their former Toltec capital. Here, these Mayanized Itza fashioned their own unique union of Mayan and Toltec cosmology and beliefs. Aware of the collapse of the dynastic monarchies in the south and the resulting social chaos, the peoples of the Yucatan changed their basic form of government by creating joint governing councils from among the cosmopolitan nobility. In this new approach, it was the position that carried the authority, not the individual who occupied it. The public sculpture and architecture commissioned by the rulers of Chichen Itza reflects this new emphasis. Here, as in the Temple of the Warriors, large groups of nobility, rather than individual kings, were portrayed on the stone pillars and temple walls. The ball court, largest of its kind in the Mayan world, was built to commemorate the successful completion of their wars of conquest. The ball game recreates the battlefield. The walls are decorated with scenes of decapitation. Other acts of ritualized sacrifice were performed at the famous cenote of Chichen Itza, where offerings from precious stones to sacrificed victims were cast into the murky depths. These victims, of both sexes and all ages, were not believed to have died, but rather entered through a portal to the other world, where they could communicate with the gods. Treasured sources of water on the arid peninsula, these sinkholes are often connected by miles of subterranean caverns and passageways that lead to the sea. At the sacred center of the city, the magnificent pyramid temple Kukulkan towers above the flat landscape. Designed to function as a celestial calendar, it is so precisely constructed that twice a year, during the spring and autumn equinox, the afternoon sun creates the image of Quetzalcoatl, the famous Mesoamerican serpent god, slithering down the side of the temple. Without the benefit of any optical tools, the Maya explored their universe through mathematical theory, astronomical observations, and extremely precise systems for measuring time. The cyclical movement of the planets were recorded through windows in the observatory that established astronomical lines of sight. In their cyclical concept of time, astronomical prediction was simply a rational approach to life.
They believe that all of these cycles and the position of a day within those cycles gives character and personality to a day. A particular day could be favorable to an action or against an action, and it doesn't predict the future. What it does is it tells you whether what you want to do is swimming upstream against the current or whether what you want to do is going downstream with the current, and the Maya preferred to be flowing with the current rather than against it.
Due to varying combinations of external pressures and internal problems, most Mayan city-states, including Chichen Itza, were unable to maintain their position and power for more than a few centuries. However, others, like the city-state of Lamanai, proved to be remarkably stable, thriving for over 2,000 years. Overlooking a wide expanse of the New River in Belize, Lamanai regulated trade along the river, which winds its way from the Maya Mountains in the west to the Caribbean Sea. This important artery connected the Maya to trading ports along the Caribbean coast, providing them with exotic goods from as far away as Honduras. The Maya were still living in Lamanai when the English arrived in Belize in the 17th century. To this day, the ancient temples of the Maya remain among the tallest structures in Belize. 1518, 4 Spanish ships exploring the coast along the Yucatan Peninsula came upon an extraordinary sight. High above steep cliffs stood a brightly painted stone city, protected by high walls and watchtowers. The Spanish conquistadors had not seen anything its equal since their arrival in the New World. Tulum was a Maya trading center and hub of maritime traffic. It was one of a string of Maya ports that stretched along 1,000 miles of coastline. Searching for gold and slaves, these first Spanish explorers put ashore only long enough to draft a royal decree claiming these new lands for the Spanish crown. They were quickly forced back to their ships under a barrage of stones and arrows. This was one of the opening exchanges in a struggle for control of the New World, which would continue for the next 500 years. The Mayans were the first Mesoamericans to meet the Spanish, and the last to be subdued. They resisted the invasion kingdom by kingdom, often waging a guerrilla war from the forests and mountains. Following decades of fierce struggle, the Spanish finally conquered the last of these kingdoms, the Quiche, where, according to legend, so many were killed that it created a river of blood. In the 3 decades following the conquest, the population of the Maya declined by over 75%. Diseases introduced by the Spanish took a further toll, with great pandemics sweeping the country for the next 200 years. Under the Spanish yoke, their lands often stolen, the Mayans were thrown into slavery, tortured for their beliefs, and denied all recourse to justice. In many cases, the Maya preferred death to surrender. In the area now known as Chiapas, hundreds of men, women, and children leapt to their death in the Sumidero Canyon rather than submit. Realizing that their religious and cultural beliefs were helping the Maya to resist, the Catholic Church and the Spanish administration began a campaign to forcibly convert them to Catholicism by destroying their symbolic art in temples, erecting Catholic churches in their place. The Spanish burned thousands of their treasured books. Only a handful survived the inferno. In a further attempt to destroy their tradition of literacy, they were allowed only a limited education in the ideas and language of the Spanish. In an effort to keep some remnants of their own knowledge and culture alive, Mayan spiritual leaders were driven underground, and the Maya began a period of resistance, sometimes passive, sometimes armed, that continues to this day. Though badly battered by systematic attempts to eradicate their culture, the Maya are a remarkably resilient people who have managed to maintain many of their old beliefs. After centuries of forced assimilation, the Maya today may appear quite different from their ancestors. From a common tongue, they have splintered into over 20 language groups and often live in small, isolated communities. The Yucatan is an arid region without rivers. The Maya here have had to rely on the seasonal rains and sinkholes scattered in the limestone shelf of the peninsula to support their small farms. The modern Yucatec farmer is continuing a way of life that has been the cornerstone of his people's economy for thousands of years. Near the modern-day town of Tulum, Don Pablo Canche has cleared part of the jungle for his farm.
Pero lo lastima de pronto, mira, lo come. Los cogollos, lo come, los puntitos, lo come, mira.
Today, with one of his 8 children, he will harvest from the beans, squash, oranges, mangoes, and papayas that grow amidst the tropical foliage. The often tiring work of clearing and harvesting is relieved by the occasional break to enjoy the fruits of their labor. The successful cultivation of corn laid the foundation for the growth of their civilization and remained sacred to the Maya, who call themselves people of the corn. In this rocky region of thin topsoil, Don Pablo practices his ancestors' methods of slash-and-burn agriculture in order to increase the soil's productivity. He thanks the forest spirits and the rain god Chak for the good crop he has had this year. Don Pablo is a village elder and a member of the Jaguar House, a Mayan church where the ancient gods like Chak are not forgotten. The frogs have started singing, and Don Pablo predicts that the rain god will soon be answering his prayers. Today, many Maya still live like their ancestors did thousands of years ago. A hurricane has blown off part of Don Pablo Canche's roof. To repair it, they cut new palm leaves for thatch, thanking the palm tree for the shade and protection it will provide. Don Pablo begins the midday meal with a dedication to Mother Earth, the sky, the heart of heaven, and the four cardinal directions. Like his ancestors, Don Pablo has a strong sense of the earth being imbued with a life force, the same soul force that flows through his blood, connecting him to the earth and the cosmos beyond. In an isolated area of southern Chiapas, near the Lacandon rainforest, the city of Chincoteac was once a thriving town on the western borders of the Mayan world. Caves are still considered to be natural passageways to the underworld, and in this region, the Maya still light candles here and leave offerings to the corn god to ensure a bountiful harvest. Religion is an essential element of Maya life. A festival in a highland village of Guatemala celebrates a mixture of Catholic and Maya beliefs. Maya, like these penitents carrying a float during a religious festival, participating in what appears to be an entirely Christian ritual, are in fact reaffirming and celebrating their own cosmic worldview. the Maya were able to retain their beliefs during their forced conversion to Christianity by transforming and disguising them. The Christian cross was reinterpreted as their world tree, which holds up the center of the cosmos, and their pantheon of deities was superimposed over the Christian pantheon of saints. Cradled by 3 volcanoes, Lake Atitlan sparkles like a jewel in the highlands of Guatemala. Descendants of the ancient kingdoms that once ruled here continue to speak the languages and walk in the footsteps of their ancestors. Mayan priests, traditionally both male and female, continue to follow the calendars and assign each day its special meaning, consulting their shaman when problems arise requiring the help of the gods and ancestors. The Maya who live in Guatemala today have rarely needed their help more than now. Despite its appellation land of eternal spring, life here is hard. 80% of the population live in conditions of extreme poverty, with the vast majority earning only a few dollars a day. In the rural areas, as many as 60% of all children die before they reach the age of 5 from disease or malnutrition. Although they constitute close to 70% of the population, Mayans make up only 1/4 of the students in Guatemala's elementary schools, and only 1% of its college graduates. In the capital, Guatemala City, largest in all of Central America, there has been rapid development over the last decade. Life is improving there for the upper class, primarily at the expense of millions of impoverished in the ranks of the lower classes. Guatemala has the most uneven distribution of land in all of Latin America, with just 2% of the population owning over 70% of the land. The only attempts to redress this injustice occurred in the early 50s, following the only period in Guatemala's history when reasonably fair elections occurred, resulting in a democratic government. However, large landowners and foreign companies operating there were determined to prevent even modest land reforms, and Guatemala's only decade of democracy ended abruptly with a military coup. To this day, the military retains its vice-like grip on the country. For the casual visitor to this colorful country, it is hard to imagine the scope of the repression and the enormity of the tragedy that has occurred. The military has waged a systematic campaign of violence to spread fear throughout the population. In the rural areas, whole villages were destroyed and their populations massacred, allegedly for being guerrilla sympathizers. Many were killed solely because they were Mayan, in what many view as a continuation of the work of the conquest. Pacayo, an active volcano near the capital city, serves as a modern-day portal to the underworld, dumping site for hundreds of victims of government violence. In all, an estimated 120,000 people have been victims of the successive waves of violence that have swept the country since the 1970s. An equal number have fled into exile, many escaping over the border to live as refugees in southern Mexico and beyond. Living in exile, many Mayans have learned how to organize, and they have begun to speak. A young Quiche woman living in Paris described the terrible violence she experienced in her autobiography, I, Rigoberto Menchu. Following its publication, she emerged as one of the leading figures in the international movement for indigenous peoples' rights and was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1992. She is regularly attacked by the military and government-controlled media as a left-wing militant because of her demands for sweeping social reform and a quick end to military domination. the spring of 1993, she hosted the first summit of indigenous peoples in Guatemala. On the opening day, her speech called on delegates to persevere in their struggle for human rights. On the second day of the conference, there was another military coup in Guatemala, and all constitutional guarantees, including the right to assemble, were suspended. Across the border in Chiapas, Mexico, the Maya are also struggling for economic and social equality. Early in 1994, a poorly armed group calling themselves Zapatistas seized control of several towns. In their declaration of war on the Mexican government, they cite the long history of oppression of the indigenous peoples and call for all people to join in their struggle for work, land, health, education, democracy, and peace. The Maya are a remarkable people who have managed not only to survive 500 years of injustice, but to have survived with hope for the future. They believe that the fifth cycle of creation, beginning in the year 2012, will be a new dawn, a time of cultural renaissance for the Maya, when their ancient wisdom will be rediscovered by the world.